We're sisters, best friends, and authors on a mission to help you stoke your creative fire and live the life of your dreams. We believe that purpose fuels passion and that creativity is your secret weapon for mass construction. There's never been a better time to bless the world with your dream realized. You're listening to The Kate and Abbie Show.
Hello, guys, and welcome to episode 11 of The Kate and Abbie Show. Super stoked to have you here listening today. It's going to be a fun episode. We're going to be talking about, this one's for the writers, by the way, creative writers, or even it could work for other methods of writing, short stories, any kind of creative writing, screenplay, stuff like that. I think all kinds of creative writing. So this one's for you guys. How to choose a title for your book. This is a question Abby and I get asked a lot. It is, how do you choose a book title? And that can be a bit of a tricky question sometimes, and something that we can struggle with through certain stories. If we didn't get a title that like dropped into our head at the outset, we might be like, well, what am I going to name this book? I know I've been there. I think a lot of us have been there, and we're going to delve into our own personal processes with how we chose titles for our books, and just some of our own personal insight on that. So this is not a one-size-fits-all, here's how to do it, but this is how we did it, and maybe something about our process will help you with your own as well.
Yeah, very exciting, fun topic.
Yeah, so if you know us a little bit, you know that I'm the author of the Blood Race trilogy. Actually, it's now a 4-book series. Abby is the author of 100 Days of Sunlight.
Yeah, very, very different names there.
Yeah.
Like, you pretty much can't get more different than that. The
Yeah,
Blood Race.
it
Which
is.
you have more titles that you came up with, really.
Right.
Because you have more books published. So you had to decide on, like, 4 titles now, right?
Yeah, 4 titles.
Whereas I've only decided on 1. But
Right.
each time the decision-making process is definitely difficult.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can get a little bit, like, gun shy about like choosing the title of their debut. Like, ooh, I want to put my best foot forward and I want it to have a really dynamic name that pulls people in and makes people want to read it. So like, what was your process like when you were choosing the title for 100 Days?
Well, it's funny because when I first had the idea for 100 Days of Sunlight, that name came to me like it was either the day that I had the idea for the book, or it was like within the first few days of thinking about it. And I love it when that happens, when like I have a book idea and then I immediately think of a good title for it, and it just has that title throughout the whole creation process, throughout the whole writing process, and it feels right. I love it when it feels right, and it just sticks. And you don't really need to ever think about, again, like, is this the right title? Because you're like, it is. It couldn't be any other way, you know?
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
kind of how it was for me with 100 Days. It just, that name came to me because I thought of the concept of the book.
Right, I was going to say what you did there, though, like not even knowing it, like it just, even though it's subconsciously just dropped in your head, what you really did was you drew on the meaning/theme, which is what I've jotted down here for like number one thing I think you guys can look at if you're like, I don't know what to name this book, is turn to the meaning and the theme of the whole story.
Right.
Because like, do you want to go into a little bit of the premise so people who haven't read the book understand what I'm talking about here?
Yeah, sure. I forget that people don't know about it. I just talk about it like everybody knows.
Yeah, you should know. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's a book that's like for all ages, all walks of life, whoever you are, wherever you are. Like, I think you'll be touched by this book. It's awesome. So uplifting, especially right now.
Yeah, I agree. It follows 2 characters, Tessa, who has recently gotten a car accident and lost her sight for 100 days, and the journey that she goes on, really just adapting to her blindness. And she meets Weston, who is, unbeknown to her, a bilateral below knee amputee, and he doesn't tell her that, but he helps her to see the beauty in the world and see that she can still have a full, beautiful life, even through her darkest days. So that's kind of the concept of the book. And the premise, I wanted to sort of play off of it with the title. and encapsulate the theme, like you said, but also like approach it kind of from it really does kind of describe the theme, but it's also kind of ironic because at some point in the book she says about being blind for 100 days, she describes it as 100 days of darkness. And so throughout the course of the events in the novel, she starts to see that her life still can be full and beautiful and wonderful and exciting and adventurous, even though she's blind. And that is kind of her discovery, is that the real sunlight isn't even necessarily the sunlight that you can see. And so then, like, what is sunlight? What is real light? And how
Right.
can you be a light in somebody's life metaphorically?
Right. And so her process of how the experience of 100 days of darkness transforms into 100 days of sunlight.
Exactly.
So it's kind of inviting you to explore what that is, what that means, what the journey of the story is. It's really a labeling of the journey.
right.
So I think that's such a cool title. It, number one, makes you ask, like, what does that mean, 100 days of sunlight? So it's a good, intriguing title.
Yeah.
And it draws you closer to learn the fuller message, which the title is directly linked to the journey that Tessa undergoes, and really Weston too, but Tessa primarily.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's such a great example of, even though it just dropped in your head, it dropped in your head kind of in light of how steeped you were in the message, the meaning behind the characters and what is propelling them through this narrative.
yeah. I agree.
So for me, with the blood race, it definitely had to do with the meaning and theme in the book, but not so much just for the one book, but also for the series as a whole, and has multiple meanings that can be found throughout the series as you read. And then Worlds Beneath, very similar. That one is actually more, not so much the theme, even though you could say it is, but it is literally about the separate worlds created by the characters beneath the ravine, which is the setting of the first book. So it actually is worlds beneath this area in which we explore this pocket of reality in book one. Now we're going beneath, to the layer beneath, to the worlds beneath. So it's really a very analog title, and it came to me right away because it's a very blunt description of where the book is taking place, but I loved it.
Yeah, I love it too. And it's honestly like such a cool premise, and just the whole world building of it. It kind of promises, and the cover as well, that the world building is going to be amazing and phenomenal and just so unique, and it really is.
Thank you. So again, I think that could be linked to theme. The theme, the place where the book is taking place. That's really another way to look at it, is like location. If your location is playing a lot into the story, then that can become kind of a neat, noteworthy thing to include in the title if the location is going to have a lot to do with the story. Something that pops into my head is the series Lark Rise to Candleford is called Lark Rise to Candleford because pretty much all of the story premises throughout the series have to do with the interactions between the town and the hamlet. And so it's a very nice encompassing way to wrap that up, is to just call it Lark Rise to Candleford. And it's going to follow a bunch of different characters from this town, from this hamlet. We're going to call it those two, the name of those two places. So that's kind of cool. So again, I think examine your story and be like, what's important here? Theme, location, the world building, the premise of your story can be a great way to immediately find like, okay, yeah, that's a great title. again, the last book in my series, Resurgence, is really just embodying what takes place in that book in a very, very broad sense. And it is a term that's also used within the language of how the characters talk. So that phrase actually has special meaning to them. The resurgence of the anomalies is something that is talked about in previous circumstances. But resurgence also means to reemerge, and that's what the entire book is all about. So looking at broad themes like that can be helpful in figuring out, like, okay, what is the direction? What is the trajectory? Again, if it's location, if it's the world building, what are the aspects in the premise of your story that are really important? What like stands out to you?
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. And like what best encapsulates the story
Right.
as a whole. Like when people hear this term, they think of this story. Or when they think of your story, they think of a certain word or a certain set of words. Like when you were saying about Worlds Beneath, like when I think of that book, I think of the amazing worlds and like how you built that whole world. And that's really the supporting element of the whole story. So that's like the thing I first think of when I think of that book. So it's like I couldn't imagine it being something else,
Right. Because like, yeah, for Worlds Beneath, that is the whole the kicker to that story is what's happening in these worlds and the very fact that they exist.
And the fact that it's not just one place.
Yes.
Because everybody thinks that it is in the beginning, in the first book.
Right.
Spoiler alert! What's beneath the ravine?
Exactly.
It's not just one place.
Right.
Which is so unique and awesome. And just,
I really, I'm not going to lie, that's my favorite of the series.
Yeah, that's my favorite too.
It was loads of fun to write, and it was so much fun. I loved that book.
When you were talking about location, things about location, naming the thing after the location, one that immediately came to mind was Downton Abbey.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Like, you can't imagine Downton Abbey being anything except Downton Abbey. Like,
right.
Can you imagine it being like,
yeah,
anything else?
Yeah, no,
Like,
you can't.
Lady Mary chooses her life.
Lady Mary's Choice.
Lady Mary's Choice. Like, who would remember that?
Exactly. The Countess and her daughters.
Yeah, the Countess and her daughters.
Like, none of it makes sense because, again, okay,
exactly.
Why is it called Downton Abbey? Downton Abbey. I always say Downton Abbey. It's like an accent thing.
Yeah, I don't know why you do that.
I always say that, but, okay, Downton Abbey is about a very broad cast of characters.
Yeah, like, it couldn't even be called just the Granthams.
Exactly.
Like, because it's not just about them.
Yes.
It encapsulates a lot.
Right. So it's like, okay, what is the commonality? The
Right.
commonality is all these characters and all these things are taking place in Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
So let's call it the hub of the action. We're going to call it Downton Abbey.
Right.
And everything takes place within the Abbey. And it makes perfect sense. It feels so clean and
relevant.
Together.
Yeah.
Very relevant. Yeah. Yes.
It does.
So I have jotted down here also a special word or a phrase. So one that pops into my head here for an example is to kill a mockingbird, which you can tell me since I have not read the book yet, regrettably, but I have seen the film numerous times, which I love. There's a special like little scene where he's talking to his kids about, and he says about what's going on in their lives at that time period. And he says something along the lines of something that would be like killing a mockingbird.
Yeah.
And so it's this little analogy he gives them.
Right.
While he's explaining some pretty heavy matters to them. But he uses that as an analogy. Is it like that in the book?
I believe so. I can't remember I want to reread it.
Or is it something similar?
Yeah, it's very similar.
Okay.
He's talking about, I think they may be talking about just like hunting or something, like with the kids and talking about, I think the gem maybe has like a slingshot that he's like trying to hit little animals with or something. I can't remember exactly. But somehow the conversation comes up about like killing little animals and birds and stuff. But Atticus says at some point like it's wrong or it's a sin to kill a mockingbird or something like along those lines. Because all they do is sing and they only bring beauty to the world, basically.
Right.
They don't do anything wrong. They don't, like, prey upon other animals, which I think in some places they do, but that's beside the point. The point was that, like you said, it was the moral behind the analogy.
Right. And he was kind of using that moral, like, to allude to the bigger overarching plot.
Yeah, exactly. And by using it in the title, the author really nodded to that as the overarching analogy, metaphor behind the whole story.
Right.
Which is so cool because it's like a really subtle way to show the readers the meaning of what you were writing without like telling them emphatically.
Right.
By like calling the whole work something that was even just a reference.
Right.
Really says a lot without you having to say a lot,
Right. Again, thought-provoking, draws you in to learn the fuller message. To kill a mockingbird, what does that mean?
Right.
Creates a question in your mind, draws you closer to learn the fuller message.
Yeah.
And it also just sounds so literary and kind of just, it's super artsy feeling to use something like a small touch that has meaning and then pulling that out and giving it bigger meaning by making it the title and not needing to have something like that seems super grand for your title and actually having something more minimal and just more like minimal and artistic feeling.
Yeah.
And there's just something really like sweet to that I really have always liked.
Yeah, I agree. Another one that comes to mind that's kind of literary is All the Light We Cannot See.
I knew you were going to say that before you even said it. I'm like, she's going to say All the Light We Cannot See.
Yes, and I love that title because you're like, I wonder what that is. Like, what is that? And then as you read it, it's not like it has like a big significance in the story, which I could probably search for more significance if I tried. But it was basically just one reference at one point in the story where they're listening to a radio program about science and the brain and stuff. And the guy on the radio is talking about how your brain never actually sees light, even though your eyes see light, and how it's like the darkest place or something, and how your brain understands what light is, but has never actually seen light. And so it's like this interesting concept that's kind of philosophical and deep, but it has some significance with the story itself, but it makes you like intrigued. And it makes you remember it better.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, it does. Because it's very unique to the story.
Yeah.
For sure. I think another thing that also like can always make a story really unique is just draw on, if it's appropriate for your story, the name of your character, which has been done in many book series. J.K. Rowling obviously thought that was a good idea, and that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what the story's about, who's the story following. See what things are notable.
Right.
If it's like, this theme that I'm going to pull out, and I'm going to make that the title. And it's going to be like, ooh, what's that? Then you want to read more. You want to know what that means.
Or it tells you sort of the concept of it without having to, before you even learn about it.
Right.
Like one that comes to mind immediately is the Lunar Chronicles, and how each book is named after the main character of each book.
Okay.
And how it starts with Cinder, and then Scarlet, and then Cress, and then Winter. And by all their names and all the covers, you are like, oh, that's going to be Cinderella. Oh, that's going to be Rapunzel. Oh, that's going to be Little Red Riding Hood. Oh, that's going to be, what's the last one? Sleeping Beauty? No.
I don't know these
Snow
books.
White.
So.
Snow White is Winter.
Okay.
And so it's like kind of playing off the original fairy tale, but it's also like you immediately know what it's going to be like spinning off
Right.
by the name and the cover.
Right. Yeah, that is clever. And yeah, so like things that are notable like that you can draw on, that's like, okay, that's a unique twist. And that, like, especially with a rewrite too, I think that's worth noting. Is if it's some kind of retelling, using something that it would be recognizable to someone, so that they recognize that's what you're doing there. If that's going to be what draws people into reading your stories because of the fact it's a retelling, don't hide the fact that it's a retelling.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? So like, what was the one for Cinderella in that series?
And that's a really good example because
What was the name of it though?
Cinder.
Okay,
but
so
the
right
cover
away.
really is what makes you like intrigued by it because it's just her foot. It's just an illustration of her foot wearing the slipper, and you can see that she's a cyborg.
Okay, right.
Like a robotic foot.
Right.
And so you're like, okay, this is different. What's this going to be? Cinderella's a cyborg. And that's kind of the whole premise that it starts off with.
Okay.
And I can see how that is really what originally created the intrigue for that book.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like, again, you know, using the unique bits. Okay, it's a retelling, but it's sci-fi.
Yes.
So try to think of like those things, like what stands out. If it's the character, or if it's the fact that it's a retelling, and we're going to make that clear. But there's something really unique about this retelling, so maybe kind of like change it up. But things that stand out, things that will intrigue, things that will cause a question to be popped in the potential reader's mind, that will make them want to draw closer, to learn the fuller message about the book, that will make them want to read the book.
Yeah, totally.
And then having something that just comes to you, I think is what happens for a lot of people. And I think that obviously that totally happens all the time, and I've had that happen for me. But it also draws off of all the principles that we just discussed.
Yeah.
Because it's usually when your mind is kind of saturated in the story, and you're thinking about the premise, and you're thinking about what matters, and you're thinking about the characters and the storyline, and that's usually when it will fall in your head like, oh, this is what it's called. And I think it's important for it to draw off of some of those, because you definitely wouldn't want something totally unrelated that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. I was just thinking that another thing that writers could do that I've kind of done mentally, not physically, but it would be good to do it physically, is to like make just this giant list of keywords, pretty much, of things that are related to the story itself, especially things that are like proper names or things that you've made up for this story that make it unique, and just like making a whole list of that, or writing them on 3x5 cards or sticky notes, and just like pulling a few and thinking about them in different ways, rearranging them, seeing which words fit together, which ones sound cool together, and drawing off of those words as for concepts for your title.
Totally. And show them to people too.
Yeah. That's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah. Like if you have some beta readers or some writing buddies, or even just some honest friends, be like, hey, read this list of names. Tell me which are the top 3 that stand out to you and why. And the why feedback is always the best, because you get some really interesting perspectives on why a title will stand out to a person.
Yeah, for sure.
And also, you know, walk through a bookstore and read titles as you're walking around. And then when you find one that pops out to you, then stop and analyze, why did it pop out to you? Why did that book seem to jump off the shelf? Why did that title catch your attention? And answer those questions for yourself. Is it because like, oh, you know, it poses a question, or it introduces a theme, or some sort of conflict? What is it that the title is introducing? Because the title, I think a lot of a lot of authors, and I don't mean this in like any persnickety way, but you see a lot, like a really oversaturated market of books with like really generic names that sound very similar to other names, like especially in maybe like the young adult world and especially fantasy series. You see a lot of
I saw
like
a funny meme one time that was like, generate your fantasy book title with like just a blank of blank and blank, and then you like pick a word from each section, like Mad Libs sort of.
right. Oh my god.
Like a kingdom of smoke and ashes.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a land of ravens and darkness. Like they all sound like that after a while.
Exactly. So that's the thing, is you have to identify like, well, wait, is it really about that? Is that even like important
Is that
to the story?
stand out anymore?
Yeah, is that going to stand out? And does it really encapsulate what you want to encapsulate for the story? This is like your chance to really tell someone in like a word or a short line a bit about what the book is, or at least what it represents.
Yeah.
So don't throw this opportunity away. This is really important, and so don't take it lightly. In fact, if you don't have a title at the outset and you just have a working title or just a document called new book, just like leave it at that. And as you're writing the book, when something feels noteworthy to you, maybe copy and paste that sentence in a separate document, or that word or the phrase, whatever it is that stood out to you, and just keep a list going. And when you finish the book, or maybe when you're a decent way through, start skimming through that list and and analyzing what those things have in common, and what are the bigger threads in this tapestry to you.
Yeah.
If it's the theme, if it's the character, if it's the location, and then kind of see like, okay, I think titles can be drawn and should be drawn from that place.
Yeah.
So I think keeping a list, whether it's just, bullet points of, okay, this happened, these events or whatever, it can really help to inspire a good, proper title that's going to really put your book in the light it deserves to be viewed in, which is introducing a little bit about what the book actually, what the theme is, what the conflict is, what's going on here.
Yeah, I agree. And it can even be cool to be like totally different, complete opposite from what you normally see in a genre. Like we were talking about going through a bookstore and just looking at the titles and what stands out to you. Also pay attention to what you see a lot of and what seems to be like the generic title of a book in your genre, and maybe think about doing something completely different than that. Like, what is the exact opposite of that? Like a fantasy story that's named something that sounds like it would be a contemporary, but the whole vibe of it is fantasy.
Right.
Or a contemporary named something that sounds like it would be a fantasy. Well, in the fantasy genre, it wouldn't stand out, but in the contemporary genre, that title might stand out amongst all the contemporary titles, because all the contemporary titles are different, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that could be something fun to play with too.
Exactly. And it's like, I think a lot of people here would be like, well, don't you want you want people to know what genre it is? Yes. But that will be, if that's being made clear by other things,
Especially
such
the
as
cover.
the cover, such as the blurb, you don't need to necessarily stay like super in line with that on every single aspect. You can get creative with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you can really play with those things.
Yeah, like even To Kill a Mockingbird, as an example, that's like a contemporary / historical fiction. Whereas you could take the same name, if it was never applied to that story, you could take that name and make it a fantasy book and have like all the fantasy cover art be super fantasy, dark fantasy looking, and the title would seem to fit.
Exactly.
If you put it in the right font and had the right design on it.
Right.
So there's a lot of freedom there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and that's kind of actually cool to like a neat exercise to take book titles and then think of them as another genre.
Yeah, like one time I think we were talking about covers and color that you use on covers.
Yeah.
And
That
you
was
said
our
something
episode about book covers.
Yeah, we have an episode about book covers, so that's a whole other topic. Definitely go hunt down that episode if you are interested. It's a great episode. But you said something about like my book. If my book didn't have the pretty colorful yellow aesthetic and it was like dark colors or it looked creepy, you could have the same name, 100 Days of Sunlight. You would be like, that's kind of a weird name for that book because it looks so creepy.
Right.
But you could make the whole aesthetic of it different.
Right.
And same with like a lot of books, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's not just fully the title.
Like even your book, you could make your book, you could take the Blood Race and you could change the cover art and make it look like it's like a, I don't know, a rowdy YA teenage fiction with like just kids in high school having car races with each other.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So because there's more than one thing going here. The title isn't all of it.
Right.
So you have the whole
and most of the time
aesthetic
people are going to
book.
see the book cover with the title. Like,
right.
I don't think anybody ever really sees the titles.
Well, I think the time when you would mostly see that is if you are hearing about it via word of mouth.
Yeah.
If you're hearing about it on a podcast or on a video or something and someone's mentioning it, that's going to be all you've got. Another circumstance would be if an article is being written about your book and they're just referencing the title and there's not a cover image. So that would be an instance where it would be important for your title to be able to hold its own without having any artwork to go with it.
True.
So I think like those circumstances, and that is something to think about if you're an author and you're thinking about, really going hard at having a career and being able to publish books and having people potentially write about your books or whatever, you're going to want your potential audience to be able to easily understand or be intrigued by the title of your book. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't get creative with it, because I'm totally for that. And I think that sometimes we can play it too safe by feeling like we need to stay within the framework of these genres that exist. And, if I call it something too weird, people won't understand what it is. But people are drawn to things that are different, especially when the market becomes oversaturated with lots of books. Like we were just saying, fantasy books that are all called similar things, or sci-fi books that are all called similar things. Romance is another genre where you see very similar titles. So think outside the box, but also let the flavor encapsulate the flavor of your book as best as you are able to.
Yeah, I agree.
So like to recap here, so choosing your book cover, some things you can ask yourself is, what is the meaning or the theme of my book? Take notes as you're writing. If you're still writing your book and you're like, I have no idea, I'm still writing this book, cool. Then whenever you encounter a place that feels like, okay, this is important, this is an important scene, this is an important character, this is a pivotal moment, then highlight pieces of dialogue, take things that are said, take locations and put them all in a document of important things about your book, and keep track of those things. So that way when you're finished, or at least when you're pretty deep into the book, you can stop and be like, okay, these things are all really important to the story.
Yeah, I think that definitely something will stand out to you more than the others as like really connecting with you and with the theme of the book. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely good to keep track of those things and to write them down as they come to you. As you're writing.
Exactly. That's the way I find easiest to do it, because sometimes it can be daunting at the end to be like, let me think back to what was important, what was the theme, what was the theme. It's like just highlight those things as you go. I know that's easier said than done if you're not like a super organized writer, which I'm not either. So just make yourself try to keep track of those things, because it will pay off to not have to go back and kind of frantically look through. Special words and phrases. Look for analogies that are important and point to overarching themes. Look for things that are said that maybe it's like a unique thing that only that character says. And so that is very, very unique to the story. or maybe it's just a certain, like a poem or a verse or something that's used that's very unique, that's very important. Things like that, special words and phrases that could stand out to you that might be like, oh wow, that could be the title. And you don't even need to necessarily keep it too short, because I mean, you have like the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, which that's a great title.
Yeah.
That title does a few things. It tells you that it's going to be more literary, and it also tells you what it's about. It's about a society in Guernsey. What kind of society is it? It's a literary society and a potato peel pie society, which tells me that there's like, it's going to be kind of funky. It's not your normal literary society. So already that gives you like 3 clues about what it's going to be. It's going to be, has some quirks and intrigue. Mm-hmm. It takes place in Guernsey, and it revolves around a literary society. So like, that's a great example right there of just a unique phrase, a unique title, something that's used that's like, that's unique to that book, and that's not going to be something that's easily replicated in other stories.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it definitely makes it stand out.
Right. And then, or it can be something that you just came up with, something that just dropped into your head. But I think you will want to objectively, before you, if you're going to publish this work, make sure that it's really representing your book well, because this might be the only thing that someone is going to see of your book. It's very possible if someone writes an article, or if someone's speaking to another person about it and they don't have the book with them to show them the cover, this is going to be all they hear about your book is, oh, hey, I'm reading fill in the blank, and it's great. That's their chance to either make the other person go, oh, wow, what is that? That sounds interesting. Or, oh, nice. You know what I mean? So do make sure that, like, totally follow your gut, but make sure that it is representing your story well.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, all we've got for how our process sort of unfolds for us. At least that's definitely question. These are all questions that I've asked myself when I've titled The Blood Race Worlds Beneath Resurgence and Anomaly.
Yeah. No, those are great questions, and I'm definitely going to be continuing to implement the same things for my future book titles as well.
Yeah, same. So tell us below, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, hop over to the YouTube channel and leave us a comment. Let us know if you are a creative writer, and if you're trying to title a book or a play or a short story or some other awesome creative piece of writing, like, tell us about it. Are you trying to choose a title, and what is your process? Is it similar to what we laid out here, the questions we've asked ourselves in the past, or do you use some different methods? If so, let us know about them, because we're always looking for new methods, new creative ways to look at things. That's what art is really all about, is finding different angles, like taking that gem and just turning it more and more and seeing the way the light is hitting it in all these different ways that you've never seen before. That's really what art is all about. That's what creative writing is all about. So please share your methods below. If you liked this podcast, let us know. Send us a message. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're watching on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. It always means a lot. And subscribe if you have not already. If you would like to support the podcast, where can they do that?
Head on over to patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show. And in case you haven't noticed, this podcast is sponsorship free and ad free. And how fun is that? You just get to listen to us without interruptions. I can't stand interruptions when I'm doing something. So if you're the same way and you want this to continue being interruption free, then
the interruption free zone.
Yeah. You can make that happen by going over to patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show, so that we can continue to deliver our best content to you guys without any ads or interruptions. If that's not something you want to do right now, we totally get it. The best way to support the show is, of course, to follow us and to share the episodes of the podcast with a friend.
Yeah, that always means a ton when you share. And it's always a great way to uplift a creative friend of yours who may be struggling with trying to find a book title.
Yeah.
might be looking for a little bit of guidance, might be a good episode to pop over to them and be like, hey, you're not alone. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of the podcast. We look forward to hearing your thoughts about it. And we look forward, as always, to seeing you in the next episode. Stay stoked.
And rock on.